All right, today we're jumping back in time, right into the thick of it, North Carolina, just after the Civil War. This era is called Reconstruction, and wow, what a roller coaster. It was a time of unbelievable hope and just soul-crushing disappointment. We're going to dig into how a state, completely shattered by war, even tried to put itself back together and answer a huge, huge question. What does it actually mean to be free? Just let that sink in for a second. For thousands upon thousands of North Carolinians, this wasn't some thought experiment. This was their life in 1865. You've got soldiers, bone-tired from years of fighting, walking home to find their farms in ruins, maybe not even theirs anymore. The whole society, all the rules they knew, just gone. Okay, let's really break this down because it's like looking at two different planets. On the left, you've got 1860. The entire system, the economy, society, who is in charge, it was all built on the backs of enslaved people. Now, look at the right, 1865. That foundation hasn't just cracked, it's been obliterated. The economy, wrecked. The government, gone. And 350,000 human beings who were legally property are now overnight free. The state was fundamentally broken. And the human toll, it's just hard to wrap your head around. Over 30,000 North Carolina soldiers just gone, never came home. Think about what that means. In every town, every county, there were families that would never be whole again. And that doesn't even count the thousands more who came back with injuries that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The loss was just catastrophic. Now, let's follow the money because this number is just wild. $200 million. And let's be crystal clear about what this is. This was the monetary value that white slaveholders had assigned to owning other human beings. From their point of view, that entire fortune just evaporated. And that's on top of the fact that all their Confederate currency was now worthless paper, their railroads and farms were destroyed, the state was totally broke. So all of this chaos, this wreckage, ushers in this historical era we call Reconstruction. And really, it was all about trying to answer two massive nation-defining questions. First, how in the world do you bring the defeated Southern states back into the country? And second, and this is the big one, what does freedom actually look like for the 4 million people who were just released from bondage? The answers to those questions would shape America for the next 100 years. The first attempt at sorting this mess out was called Presidential Reconstruction. It was led by Andrew Johnson, the guy who took over after Lincoln's assassination. And his plan, well, it was meant to be quick and easy. Basically, he told North Carolina, hey, just swear you're loyal, officially get rid of slavery, forget about your war debt, and you can come right back in. He was hoping to just slap a Band-Aid on the whole thing and move on. But here's the thing. While all the politicians were making their plans, newly freed African Americans were not just sitting around waiting. They organized. They held their own statewide convention, the first of its kind, right in Raleigh. And look at what they asked for. This is so powerful. They weren't asking for charity. They were demanding the basic rights of any citizen: the vote, equality in the courtroom, the right to serve on a jury. Now, the white establishment ignored them at first, but a line had been drawn in the sand. So, how did the new state legislature respond? Instead of expanding rights, they passed something called the Black Codes. And these were exactly what they sound like. They were designed to control every aspect of Black life. You could think of them as slavery by another name. They dictated where people could go, what jobs they could have. It was a blatant attempt to put the old system back in place, just without officially calling it slavery. Well, the federal government saw these Black Codes, and they were not having it. Their answer was to create this agency, the Freedmen's Bureau. You can see here they did a lot of stuff, kind of like a Red Cross, handing out food, providing medical care, helping with contracts. But you know what the most important, the most lasting thing they did was? Check out that last bullet point: education. They helped build hundreds of schools because formerly enslaved people knew that reading and writing was the real key to freedom. So here's where the gloves come off. When North Carolina and other southern states passed the Black Codes and refused to approve the 14th Amendment, we'll get to that in a sec, a group in Congress called the Radical Republicans just said, nope, we're done playing nice. These guys believed in full equality. So as you see on the timeline, they took over, threw out the new southern governments, and put the entire South under military occupation to force some real change. The soft approach was over. And the engine driving this whole radical shift? It was 3 game-changing amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And there's a really easy way to remember them. Just think free citizens vote. Let's walk through them. First up, the 13th Amendment. This is the big one. It's what makes the phrase free citizens vote start with free. It takes what the Emancipation Proclamation started and carves it into the stone of American law. It's simple, it's direct. Slavery is done. Forever. Okay, so if the 13th made them free, the 14th Amendment made them citizens, and this was a huge deal. The Supreme Court had previously said that Black people could never be citizens. This amendment completely flips that on its head. It says if you're born here, you're a citizen. End of story. And then it adds this powerhouse phrase, equal protection of the laws. That clause is the foundation for pretty much every major civil rights victory that would come later. And that brings us to the last piece of the puzzle. Vote. Free citizens vote. The 15th Amendment said you couldn't deny someone the right to vote just because of their race. This was a massive earthquake in American politics. It gave Black men political power for the first time in history. Now, we should note, it did leave out women of all races, but it was still a monumental leap forward. And this wasn't just some theory written on a piece of paper. It had immediate, real-world consequences. Look at that number. Over 1,500. That's how many Black men got elected to public office during Reconstruction. All of a sudden, you had former slaves serving as sheriffs, as state legislators, even as members of the U.S. Congress. They were writing the laws for the very people who used to own them. Just imagine that. But here's the tragedy. While African Americans were gaining all this political freedom, they were fighting a losing battle for economic freedom. You see, without land of their own, most formerly enslaved people were forced into a system called sharecropping. On paper, it sounds kind of fair, right? You work the land, you give the owner a share of the crop. But in reality, the landowner would charge them crazy high prices for seeds and tools, trapping them in a cycle of debt they could never, ever escape. It was just another form of control. As you can probably guess, a lot of white Southerners were furious about all these changes, and they launched a vicious propaganda campaign. They came up with these insulting names you see here. Northerners who came down to help rebuild or start businesses were called carpetbaggers, as if they were just greedy outsiders. And any white Southerner who supported equality and worked with the new governments, they were branded scalawags, which was basically calling them a traitor to their race. But it didn't stop with insults. It escalated to terrorism. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan were formed with one simple, brutal goal: use violence, fear, and murder to stop Black people from voting and to take back power. That wave of terror, combined with a national economic depression that made people in the North lose focus, and finally, a dirty backroom political deal in the 1876 presidential election, it all led the North to just give up. The federal government pulled its troops out of the South, and that was the end. So the moment the federal troops left, the white supremacist Redeemer governments swooped in. Now, they couldn't just pass a law saying Black people can't vote. The 15th Amendment was still there, so they got creative. They set up this whole system of tricky obstacles. They created poll taxes that poor farmers couldn't pay. They made up literacy tests that were basically impossible to pass, especially for people who had been legally barred from learning to read. And then, the grandfather clause was the secret escape hatch that let poor and illiterate white guys vote anyway. It was a totally rigged game. And then, the U.S. Supreme Court came in and put the official stamp of approval on this whole backward slide. In this infamous case, Plessy v. Ferguson, the court came up with this idea of separate but equal. That phrase became the legal excuse for racial segregation, for Jim Crow, for more than half a century. And of course, it was a total lie. Things were always separate, but they were never equal. This ruling slammed the door shut on the promises of Reconstruction. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, the official period of Reconstruction ended in 1877, for sure. But as this question gets at, the struggle it started, that didn't end at all. In fact, those amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, even though they were ignored for almost 100 years, they became the legal firepower for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. The questions that were being asked in North Carolina back in 1865 about citizenship, about freedom, about what equality really means, we're still wrestling with those very same questions today. The story of Reconstruction isn't really over. We're all still living in it.